Imagine a world where everyone is happy, where suffering has been eliminated, where pleasure is not just available but guaranteed, where science has solved the problem of human misery once and for all. Sounds perfect, doesn't it? But what if that perfection came at a price? What if the cure for suffering was worse than the disease? In 1932, Aldous Huxley published a novel that would haunt the 20th century and beyond. Brave New World presented a vision of the future so seductive and so horrifying that readers couldn't decide whether to embrace it or recoil from it. Unlike other dystopias that ruled through fear and oppression, Huxley's nightmare ruled through pleasure and satisfaction. This wasn't Big Brother watching you. This was Big Brother giving you everything you wanted until you forgot you ever wanted anything else. 80 years later, we're living in that world. Not completely, not yet, but the signs are everywhere. We carry devices that deliver instant gratification. We consume entertainment designed to keep us pacified. We take pills to smooth out every rough edge of existence. We've built a civilization dedicated to the pursuit of pleasure and the elimination of discomfort. And we're discovering what Huxley knew, that a world without suffering might also be a world without meaning. Today, we'll explore how Huxley saw the future with terrifying clarity. We'll examine the mechanisms of control he imagined and how they're being deployed around us right now. And we'll confront the hardest question of all. If happiness is the goal, why should we resist a system that delivers it so efficiently? This is the story of Brave New World and the warning it carries for every generation that reads it. A warning about what we lose when we trade freedom for comfort, depth for distraction, truth for pleasure. The Man Who Saw Tomorrow. Aldous Leonard Huxley was born in 1894 into one of Britain's most intellectually distinguished families. His grandfather, Thomas Henry Huxley, was known as Darwin's bulldog for his fierce defense of evolution. His brother Julian would become a renowned biologist and the first director of UNESCO. The Huxley name meant science, reason, progress. But young Aldous took a different path. At 16, he contracted an eye disease that left him nearly blind for 2 years. During that darkness, he couldn't read, couldn't pursue the scientific career everyone expected. He had to sit with his own thoughts, trapped inside his head, with nothing to distract him from the workings of his own mind. When his sight partially returned, Aldous had changed. He'd discovered something during those blind years, that the inner world was as vast and complex as anything science could reveal about the outer world. He began to write, channeling his family's analytical precision into fiction and essays that dissected human nature with surgical clarity. By the 1920s, Huxley had established himself as one of the most brilliant satirists of his generation. He moved through intellectual circles in London and Paris, observing the post-war generation's desperate pursuit of pleasure, their frantic attempts to forget the horror they'd just survived. He watched people dance faster, drink harder, embrace any distraction from the void that war had revealed at the heart of European civilization. But Huxley was watching something else too. He saw how technology was changing society, how mass production wasn't just creating products, but reshaping human consciousness itself. Henry Ford's assembly line had revolutionized manufacturing, but it had also introduced a new logic, standardization, efficiency, the reduction of complex processes into simple, repeatable steps. Huxley asked a question that haunted him. What if this logic was applied not just to making cars, but to making people? What if human beings themselves could be mass-produced, engineered for specific purposes, conditioned to be perfectly content with their assigned roles? The idea crystallized during a trip to the United States in 1926. Huxley was simultaneously fascinated and horrified by American culture. He saw a society that had fully embraced mass consumption, where entertainment was becoming industrialized, where advertising was learning to manufacture desires rather than simply satisfy them. He saw the future, and it terrified him. When he returned to Europe, he began writing. The novel poured out of him in 4 months, from May to August 1931, as if the vision had been waiting fully formed in his mind and just needed to be transcribed. He called it Brave New World, borrowing the phrase from Shakespeare's The Tempest, where Miranda, seeing humans for the first time, exclaims in wonder at their beauty. In Shakespeare, the line is innocent, optimistic. In Huxley's hands, it drips with irony. The book was published in 1932, and the reaction was immediate and polarized. Some critics were shocked by its sexual frankness and its cynicism about human nature. Others recognized it as a masterpiece of prophetic fiction. H.G. Wells, the great science fiction writer, hated it, accusing Huxley of betraying the progressive ideals that should guide discussions of the future. George Orwell would later write his own dystopia, 1984, partly in response to Huxley's vision, arguing that totalitarianism would come through pain and fear, not pleasure and satisfaction. But Huxley had touched something deep. The novel became a phenomenon, selling millions of copies, translated into dozens of languages, assigned in schools, debated in universities. And with each passing decade, it seemed less like fantasy and more like prophecy. The world Huxley imagined in 1931 was starting to materialize around us. The world state? Brave New World opens with a tour. The director of hatcheries and conditioning is showing a group of students through the Central London Hatchery and Conditioning Center where human beings are manufactured. Not born, manufactured. The first thing Huxley wants us to understand is that in this world, reproduction has been completely divorced from biology. There are no mothers, no fathers, no families. Human embryos are created in laboratories, grown in artificial wombs, and subjected to precise chemical and environmental controls that determine everything about what they'll become. The society is divided into castes, each designed for specific functions. At the top are the alphas, engineered to be intelligent, attractive, and capable of complex thought. They're given the best nutrition during development, the most oxygen, the most favorable conditions. Below them are betas, slightly less capable but still competent. Then gammas, deltas, and finally epsilons, each tier progressively more limited, more stunted, more suited for menial labor. The epsilons are created through a process called Bokanovsky's process, where a single fertilized egg is forced to divide again and again, producing up to 96 identical individuals from one embryo. These mass-produced humans are then deliberately stunted, deprived of oxygen, poisoned with alcohol so their brains never fully develop. They're engineered to be just intelligent enough to perform simple tasks, but not intelligent enough to question their role or feel dissatisfied. This isn't cruelty, this is efficiency. Why waste resources developing full intelligence in someone whose job is to operate an elevator? Why create individuals with complex needs and desires when what society requires are interchangeable parts in a machine? But the engineering doesn't stop at biology. After they're born, or rather decanted, the children are subjected to conditioning that shapes their psychological responses at the deepest level. Infants destined for the lower castes are shown books and flowers, then given electric shocks until they develop a visceral hatred of reading and nature. Why? Because reading might make them think, and nature might make them appreciate something that doesn't require consumer spending. The conditioning continues throughout childhood through a process called hypnopedia, sleep teaching. While children sleep, voices whispers lessons into their unconscious minds, thousands of repetitions that become harder than instinct. The lessons are simple, designed to create perfect citizens. Ending is better than mending. Don't repair things, replace them. Keep the economy moving. Everyone belongs to everyone else. Suppress jealousy, possessiveness, the family bond. A gram is better than a dam. Take drugs rather than confront negative emotions. By the time they reach adulthood, the citizens of the world state don't need to be forced to behave correctly. They want to behave correctly. Their conditioning has aligned their desires perfectly with what the system requires. They're not slaves. They're happy servants who can't imagine wanting anything different. The society is organized around one principle: stability. After centuries of war, revolution, economic collapse, and social upheaval, humanity decided that stability was the supreme value. Everything that might threaten stability has been eliminated. Family bonds that create competing loyalties, religion that promises transcendent meaning beyond the state, art that provokes uncomfortable questions, science that might discover inconvenient truths. The calendar itself has been reset. Years are no longer measured from the birth of Christ, but from the introduction of Ford's Model T. The year is AF 632, after Ford, and Ford himself is worshipped as a kind of god. Citizens make the sign of the T, a parody of the Christian cross. They speak of our Ford where previous generations said our Lord. The sacred principle is not love or justice, but production and consumption. Sex has been completely separated from reproduction and from emotional attachment. Children are conditioned from infancy to engage in erotic play. Adults are encouraged to have multiple partners, to treat intimacy as a recreational activity no more significant than a game of tennis. Monogamy is considered obscene, perverse, a dangerous attachment that might create the kind of intense emotional bond that could threaten loyalty to the collective. When negative emotions do arise, when anxiety or sadness or anger breaks through the conditioning, citizens don't have to endure them. They have soma, a perfect drug with no side effects and no hangover. 1 gram for a mild lift, 2 for a break from reality, 3 for a full vacation from consciousness. The government distributes it freely. There's a soma holiday available whenever you need one. This is the world Huxley created, a place where suffering has been engineered out of existence, where everyone is provided for, where pleasure is abundant and freely available, where the rough edges of human nature have been smoothed away by chemistry and conditioning. It's a world where everyone is happy. So why does it feel like hell? The savage and the civilized. The novel's plot is simple but devastating. Bernard Marx, an alpha who feels vaguely dissatisfied with his life despite all its pleasures, takes a woman named Lenina to a savage reservation, one of the few remaining places where humans still live in the old way, with families and religion and all the messy irrationality that the world state eliminated. On the reservation, they discover John, a young man born to a world state citizen who got stranded there years before. John has grown up reading Shakespeare, the one book his mother managed to salvage from civilization. His mind is formed by Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, The Tempest, by stories of love and sacrifice and meaning. Bernard brings John back to London, and the collision between the savage, as John is called, and the world state becomes the engine of the novel's tragedy. John is simultaneously attracted and repelled by what he sees: the abundance, the cleanliness, the absence of disease and poverty. All of this amazes him. But the spiritual emptiness, the casual sexuality, the drugged contentment, all of this horrifies him. Lenina falls in love with John, or thinks she does. In her world, love means wanting to have sex with someone, so she offers herself to him directly, repeatedly, confused by his refusal. She can't understand why he won't take what she's freely giving. John, raised on Shakespeare's tales of courtly love and romantic devotion, is devastated by her inability to conceive of intimacy as anything more than physical pleasure. The clash reaches its climax when John's mother, now back in civilization, takes too much soma and dies. John, watching her death, surrounded by identical Epsilon twins who've been conditioned to view death as no more significant than any other biological process, finally breaks. He tries to start a revolution, to free the deltas from their conditioning, to wake them up to what they've lost. It fails, of course. The deltas don't want to be freed. They want their soma. They want their pleasures. They want to remain comfortable and content. John's passion, his suffering, his intensity, all of it is incomprehensible to them. They've been conditioned to avoid exactly the kind of emotional extremes that John sees as the essence of being human. John is brought before Mustafa Mond, one of the world controllers who governs the society. Mond is different from the others. He's read Shakespeare, studied history, understands what was sacrificed to create this stable world. He chose stability consciously, knowing the price. Their conversation is the heart of the novel. John argues for freedom, for the right to be unhappy, for art and religion and passionate love. Mond calmly explains why these things are incompatible with a stable society. Art requires suffering to have depth. Religion requires fear and uncertainty. Passionate love creates jealousy and possessiveness. All of these destabilize the social order. John makes the case for the human spirit, for the need to struggle and strive and feel deeply. Maund makes the case for contentment, for a world without war or poverty or disease. And the terrible thing is that both of them are right. Huxley doesn't stack the deck. He shows us the genuine appeal of the world state and the genuine horror of it, and he forces us to choose. John can't accept the compromise. He retreats to an abandoned lighthouse, trying to live in solitude and practice self-denial as penance for the contamination of civilization. But the world state won't leave him alone. Curiosity seekers flock to watch the savage whip himself, to see authentic suffering as a kind of entertainment. Lenina appears, and John, overwhelmed by conflicting desires, whips her too, then participates in an orgy fueled by Soma. The next morning, sober and horrified by what he's done, John hangs himself. The last image is his body swinging in the lighthouse, slowly rotating in the wind. North, south, east, west, turning eternally, going nowhere. Pleasure is prison. The genius of Huxley's dystopia is that it doesn't look like oppression. There are no jackbooted thugs, no secret police, no torture chambers. The world state rules through satisfaction, not fear. And this makes it far more insidious than any dictatorship built on violence. Traditional tyrannies work through negative reinforcement. They show you what happens if you disobey. The threat of punishment keeps people in line, but this creates resistance. People naturally rebel against systems that cause them pain. They dream of freedom, organize underground movements, take risks to overthrow their oppressors. The world state is smarter. It uses positive reinforcement exclusively. It gives people what they want, or more precisely, it shapes what they want and then satisfies those manufactured desires perfectly. There's no reason to rebel because there's nothing to rebel against. The system isn't denying you anything. It's giving you everything. This is the central insight that makes Brave New World more relevant now than when it was written. We've learned that you don't control people by threatening them. You control them by making them comfortable. You control them by making resistance seem not just difficult but pointless, even incomprehensible. Think about Soma, the perfect drug. It doesn't work like alcohol or heroin, substances that offer temporary escape but create dependency and degradation. Soma has no negative effects, no hangover, no addiction in the physical sense, no health consequences. It just makes you happy. It removes anxiety, dissolves depression, creates a calm contentment, or euphoric bliss depending on the dose. Why would anyone refuse it? John refuses because he believes suffering is meaningful, that it's part of being fully human. But to the citizens of the world state, this position is insane. You want to suffer? You're choosing pain over pleasure? That's not admirable. That's pathological. And they have a point. What is the argument against Soma, really? If a drug could eliminate psychological suffering without any negative side effects, wouldn't it be irrational not to take it? We already use antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, and various substances to smooth out our emotional lives. We just haven't perfected the formula yet, but we're working on it. The world state doesn't just drug its citizens, it entertains them. The feelies have replaced movies, immersive experiences where viewers don't just watch but feel everything the characters feel through electrodes that stimulate the nervous system. Emotional porn, sensation without consequence, intensity without risk. Electromagnetic golf and obstacle golf provide physical recreation. Synthetic music satisfies aesthetic needs. Every desire has an outlet, every itch has a scratch. The system has achieved what every previous society attempted but failed to accomplish, the elimination of frustration. But here's what Huxley understood. Frustration is not a bug in human psychology, it's a feature. Dissatisfaction is what drives us to create, to explore, to question, to grow. When you eliminate frustration, you don't create contentment. You create stagnation. The world state has been stable for 600 years. Nothing has changed in that time. Nothing can change. Change requires someone to be dissatisfied enough with how things are to imagine something different. But there are no dissatisfied people, except for the occasional Bernard Marx or Helmholtz Watson, anomalies in the conditioning process who are quickly identified and exiled to islands where they can't contaminate others. This is stability purchased at the price of progress. This is peace purchased at the price of meaning. This is happiness purchased at the price of being human. The engineering of desire. The most disturbing aspect of the world state isn't that it controls behavior, it's that it controls desire itself. By the time citizens reach adulthood, they don't want anything the system hasn't programmed them to want. Consider how this works with consumption. Citizens are conditioned to hate nature because appreciating natural beauty costs nothing. A sunset is free. A forest is free. If people can derive satisfaction from things that don't require consumption, the economy stagnates. So children are taught to feel uncomfortable in natural settings, to prefer the manufactured environments where spending is required. They're conditioned to hate books because reading is solitary and doesn't require purchasing new things constantly. They're taught that ending is better than mending, so they'll replace rather than repair, keeping the factories running, keeping employment high, keeping the economy churning. Even their sexuality is engineered for economic purposes. Promiscuity is encouraged not because it's inherently better than monogamy, but because it requires consumption. New clothes for each encounter, new contraceptives, new accessories. Settled relationships reduce spending. Couple hobbies are less expensive than always playing the field. So the world state conditions people to feel that monogamy is obscene, that lasting attachments are perverse. This is the nightmare scenario for human freedom. Not that we're forced to do things against our will, but that our will itself is manufactured. We think we're making free choices, but we're actually following programming so deep we can't even perceive it. Huxley was writing decades before the development of modern advertising and propaganda techniques, before the rise of social media and algorithmic manipulation. But he understood the principle. You don't need to force people if you can shape what they desire. And once you can do that, resistance becomes almost impossible, because resistance requires first recognizing that you're being controlled. The citizens of the world state can't recognize their conditioning because their conditioning includes the inability to recognize conditioning. They've been taught that they're free, that they're happy, that they're making their own choices. And at the level of conscious experience, they are making choices. It's just that the menu of options, the criteria for choosing, and the satisfaction derived from those choices have all been engineered in advance. This is more sophisticated than simple brainwashing. Brainwashing breaks the person and rebuilds them. The world state never lets them become whole individuals in the first place. From the moment of conception, every aspect of development is controlled. There's no authentic self to break because there was never an authentic self to begin with. The elimination of depth. One of the most subtle mechanisms of control in the world state is the elimination of solitude. Citizens are conditioned from infancy to feel uncomfortable when alone. Every moment of every day is filled with activity, with other people, with noise and stimulation. There's no space for reflection, for the kind of deep thinking that might lead to questioning. Helmholtz Watson, one of the few characters who approaches genuine dissatisfaction, describes feeling that he has something to say, but not knowing what it is. He writes propaganda jingles that everyone loves, but he senses there's a different kind of writing possible, something deeper and more meaningful. But he can't quite grasp it because he's never been taught the language for it. This is how the world state deals with the problem of intelligence. You can't engineer intelligence out of alphas. You need them to be smart enough to run things. But you can prevent them from using that intelligence in dangerous ways by never teaching them the concepts that would allow deep critique of the system. There's no history because the past is destabilizing. Why should today's system be eternal if people know it was different yesterday? There's no philosophy because philosophical thinking leads to questions that have no satisfying answers. There's no serious literature because literature explores the human condition in all its complexity, including suffering and meaning and moral choice. Shakespeare, the one book John knows, is banned not because the world state fears the specific content, but because Shakespeare deals with themes that the world state has tried to eliminate from consciousness. Love that transcends physical pleasure. honor that requires sacrifice, tragedy that gives suffering meaning. These concepts don't compute in a world where everyone belongs to everyone else and soma is always available. What Huxley understood is that vocabulary shapes thought. If you don't have words for certain concepts, you literally cannot think those thoughts. The world state carefully curates language, eliminating words that might allow subversive thinking, not through explicit censorship, but through education that simply never introduces those concepts. You don't need to ban books if you've conditioned people to hate reading. You don't need to suppress art if you've eliminated the human experiences that give art its power. You don't need to prevent philosophical thinking if you've never taught anyone philosophy in the first place. This is a more complete form of control than physical coercion. It operates at the level of consciousness itself. And the terrifying thing is that we're halfway there already. The problem of excellence. The world state has solved the problem of inequality by eliminating excellence. Not explicitly, but functionally. Alphas are intelligent and capable, but they are intelligent and capable within narrow parameters. They can run complex operations and solve technical problems, but they can't think creatively or imagine alternatives to the existing system. Real excellence requires more than intelligence. It requires obsession, the willingness to sacrifice everything else for mastery of something. It requires suffering through failure, pushing past comfortable competence into the territory where nothing is certain. It requires the kind of monomania that the world state considers dangerous. Helmholtz Watson is the closest thing to an artist in the novel. He has a gift for words, a sense of rhythm and impact in language, but his talent is channeled into writing hypnopedic slogans and propaganda jingles. He's never been exposed to real poetry, real literature, the kind of writing that doesn't serve the state, but serves truth. When John recites Shakespeare to him, something awakens. Helmholtz laughs at first, finding the passionate love affair in Romeo and Juliet absurd. But then he stops laughing. He senses something in the language, something powerful and dangerous and thrilling. He can't fully understand it because he lacks the emotional context, but he recognizes that this is what he's been groping toward. The world state can't allow this kind of excellence because excellence is destabilizing. If one person achieves something extraordinary, it implicitly criticizes everyone who didn't. It creates hierarchy based on merit rather than on engineered caste. It suggests that some lives are more meaningful than others, that some achievements matter more than others. The genius of the world state is that it makes everyone excellent at their assigned function. Epsilons are perfectly suited for operating elevators. Deltas are perfectly suited for factory work. Gammas, betas, alphas. Each is excellent at what they're designed to do, but none of them is excellent in the sense that Michelangelo was excellent, or Shakespeare, or Beethoven creating something unprecedented, pushing human capability into new territory. This kind of excellence can't be engineered because it requires freedom. Not political freedom necessarily, but psychological freedom, the space to explore, fail, obsess, suffer, and create something new. The world state has eliminated that space in favor of perfect efficiency. And efficiency is the enemy of excellence. Efficiency means doing known things in optimal ways. Excellence means doing unknown things, trying what hasn't been tried, accepting the possibility of failure in pursuit of breakthrough. You can't schedule excellence. You can't mass produce it. You can't make it safe. The cost of stability. Mustafa Mann's argument to John is brutally honest. He doesn't pretend the world state is perfect. He openly acknowledges what's been sacrificed, but he argues that the sacrifice was worth it because the alternative is worse. Before the world state, Mann explains, there was chaos, war, poverty, disease, inequality, suffering on an unimaginable scale. People hurt each other, betrayed each other, killed each other over resources and beliefs and tribal loyalties. The world was saturated with misery. The world state ended all of that. No more war because everyone is conditioned to value stability. No more poverty because production is scientifically managed. No more disease because genetic engineering and medicine have conquered biology. No more inequality because everyone is designed for their role and conditioned to be content with it. The cost was freedom. The cost was art. The cost was religion and philosophy and passionate love. The cost was everything that makes life feel meaningful to someone like John. But Mond argues that meaning is a luxury purchased with other people's suffering. Better to have shallow contentment for everyone than depth for the few. And he's not wrong. Not entirely. The argument for the world state is stronger than readers usually want to admit. Would you choose a world where you could be Shakespeare but millions would starve? Or would you choose a world where everyone has enough, where no one suffers, even if it means no more Shakespeare? Huxley doesn't let us off easy with this question. He shows us John's position, romantic and principled, and ultimately suicidal. And he shows us Mond's position, pragmatic and comprehensive and soul-destroying. Both are coherent, both have merit, and the choice between them defines what it means to be human. The world state has achieved something unprecedented. It has eliminated suffering without creating obvious evil. No one is being tortured, no one is starving, no one is being worked to death. People are genuinely happy, at least according to every measurable criterion. The fact that their happiness is shallow, that it's been engineered, that it comes at the cost of everything that makes consciousness worthwhile. These are philosophical objections, not practical ones. John's suicide is the only answer he can offer to Mond's logic. He can't argue his way out because Mond is too smart, too well-read, too aware of the implications of both positions. So John chooses death, the ultimate assertion of individual will against the collective. The final claim that some things matter more than survival and comfort. The world we built. Writing in 1931, Huxley imagined a future 600 years away. But within his own lifetime, he watched the mechanisms he'd invented in fiction start to appear in reality. The book wasn't prophecy, it was extrapolation. Huxley saw the direction things were moving and followed the line to its logical conclusion. By 1958, Huxley was alarmed enough to write Brave New World Revisited, a non-fiction analysis of how his fictional predictions were manifesting. He saw television emerging as a tool for mass conditioning, not through explicit propaganda, but through entertainment that kept people passive and distracted. He saw pharmaceutical companies developing new drugs that promised to eliminate psychological discomfort. He saw advertising becoming more sophisticated, learning to bypass rational thought and appeal directly to unconscious desires. Most disturbing to Huxley was the speed of change. He'd set his novel 6 centuries in the future because he assumed that kind of transformation would take generations. But 30 years after publication, the building blocks were already in place. Today, we're living in the transition. We haven't reached the full dystopia, but we're moving toward it with frightening momentum. Consider the parallels. We have pharmaceutical enhancement of mood and cognition, not soma yet, but getting closer. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, stimulants for focus, sleeping pills for rest. We're solving the problem of human psychology through chemistry, treating emotional states as engineering problems to be fixed, rather than experiences to be understood. We have entertainment that replaces experience. Virtual reality is primitive compared to the feelies, but the principle is the same. We can enter simulated worlds, feel sensations divorced from consequence, experience intensity without risk. Millions of people spend more time in digital spaces than physical ones, living through avatars, relationships mediated by screens. We have the engineering of desire through advertising and social media. Every click is tracked, every preference recorded, every behavioral pattern analyzed by algorithms designed to predict and manipulate what we want. We think we're making choices, but we're being guided through decision spaces that have been carefully constructed to lead us toward predetermined outcomes. We have the elimination of solitude. Constant connectivity means we're never truly alone, never forced to sit with our own thoughts. The smartphone is a soma dispenser, offering infinite distraction from the discomfort of being present with ourselves. We've been conditioned to feel anxious when separated from our devices, when faced with silence or boredom. We have the collapse of attention. The average person can't focus on one thing for more than a few minutes before reaching for distraction. We've trained our nervous systems to crave novelty, to chase dopamine hits, to avoid anything that requires sustained effort or delayed gratification. We have sexual liberation divorced from emotional depth, closer to Brave New World's model than to any previous society in history. Dating apps gamify intimacy. Hookup culture treats sex as recreation. The language of commitment and sacrifice has given way to the language of individual satisfaction and freedom from obligation. We're creating a world where being uncomfortable is considered a problem to be solved rather than a normal part of human experience. Where every moment of boredom must be filled. Where every negative emotion must be medicated away. Where difficulty is something to be avoided rather than embraced. This is the path to the world state, not through deliberate tyranny, but through the accumulated effect of millions of choices aimed at increasing comfort and reducing friction. We're building the prison ourselves, one convenience at a time. The failure of democracy. Huxley believed that Brave New World illustrated a more likely future than Orwell's 1984. Orwell imagined totalitarianism imposed through violence, a boot stamping on a human face forever. But Huxley argued that modern tyranny would come through pleasure, not pain. The crucial difference is consent. In Orwell's dystopia, people know they're oppressed. They're forced to obey, and they hate their oppressors, even as they submit. This creates the possibility of resistance. If circumstances change, if the system weakens, revolution becomes possible. In Huxley's dystopia, people consent to their own oppression because they don't recognize it as oppression. They've been conditioned to desire exactly what the system provides. They defend the status quo because they've internalized its values so completely that criticism seems not just wrong, but incomprehensible. This is what's happening to democratic societies right now. We're not being conquered, we're being seduced. And seduction is more permanent than conquest because the victim becomes complicit in their own subjugation. Consider how technology companies operate. They offer services that are genuinely valuable, that make our lives more convenient, more connected, more entertaining. In exchange, they collect data about every aspect of our behavior, using it to build psychological profiles more detailed than anything the Stasi could have dreamed of. But we consent to this. We click I agree on terms of service we never read. We trade privacy for convenience, autonomy for entertainment, freedom for comfort. And once we've made that trade, it's almost impossible to go back because we've become dependent on the services we've subscribed to. This is the world state's model applied through capitalism rather than socialism. You don't need a centralized government to implement conditioning when corporations can do it more efficiently. You don't need state censorship when algorithmic curation can hide inconvenient information without anyone noticing. You don't need propaganda when you have targeted advertising and social media echo chambers. Democracy requires informed citizens capable of critical thinking. But we're creating systems that undermine both of those requirements. Information is abundant, but attention is scarce. So people become informed about nothing in depth. Critical thinking is difficult and often uncomfortable, so people retreat into ideological bubbles where their assumptions are never challenged. The result is a population that has all the formal trappings of democracy, free elections, free speech, free press, but lacks the psychological capacity to use those freedoms effectively. We're free in theory, but conditioned in practice. Huxley saw this coming. He understood that the greatest threat to freedom wouldn't be people who wanted to take it away, but people offering to trade it for something else, something more immediately appealing. Security, comfort, entertainment, pleasure. Freedom is abstract. Pleasure is concrete. In that contest, pleasure wins almost every time. The destruction of meaning. The deepest horror of Brave New World isn't that people are controlled, it's that they're hollow. They move through life experiencing pleasure but never meaning. They're satisfied but never fulfilled. They're alive but not fully human. Meaning requires several things that the world state systematically eliminates. It requires struggle, the sense that something is difficult and therefore worthwhile. But the world state makes everything easy, removing the friction that gives achievement significance. It requires connection, deep relationships that involve vulnerability and commitment. But the world state conditions people to avoid attachments, to treat intimacy as a transaction rather than bond. It requires mortality, the awareness that time is limited and therefore precious. But the world state extends youth artificially and encourages people to live as if they have forever, eliminating the urgency that makes choices matter. It requires choice, genuine choice, between alternatives that have real consequences. But the world state conditions people to want only what's available and to be satisfied with what they're given, eliminating the space where authentic choice could occur. Most fundamentally, meaning requires the possibility of suffering. We derive meaning from overcoming difficulty, from sacrificing for something larger than ourselves, from enduring pain for the sake of love or truth or beauty. Strip away suffering and you strip away the possibility of meaning. John's position, articulated in his confrontation with Mond, is that he's claiming the right to be unhappy, the right to suffer, to struggle, to age, to face mortality, to feel the full weight of existence rather than float through a chemically managed simulation of life. Mond considers this insane, and by utilitarian standards, it is insane. Why choose suffering over contentment? Why embrace difficulty when ease is available? The world state has solved the oldest problem in philosophy, the problem of evil, by eliminating the conditions that produce suffering. Isn't that exactly what every religion and ethical system has aimed for? But John understands something Mond has forgotten or chosen to ignore. Suffering isn't a design flaw in consciousness. It's information. It's the signal that tells us something matters. When we eliminate the capacity to suffer, we eliminate the capacity to care about anything deeply enough that its loss would hurt. The citizens of the world state don't love because love requires the possibility of loss. They don't create because creation requires the risk of failure. They don't sacrifice because sacrifice requires valuing something more than comfort. They've been reduced to pleasure machines, experiencing sensation, but never meaning, satisfied, but never fulfilled. The technology of control. What makes Brave New World prophetic isn't the specific technologies Huxley imagined. Artificial wombs and hypnopedia haven't materialized exactly as he described, but the principles behind those technologies, the logic of engineering human consciousness for social purposes, that's manifesting everywhere. Consider social media. On the surface, it's about connection and communication, but the deeper function is behavioral modification. Every platform is designed to maximize engagement, which means it's designed to trigger psychological responses that keep users coming back. The like button, the notification ping, the infinite scroll. These aren't neutral design choices. They're carefully engineered to exploit known vulnerabilities in human psychology. They trigger dopamine release, create anxiety when ignored, foster addiction through variable reward schedules. They're soma for the information age, providing measured doses of social validation that keep us pacified and engaged. The algorithms that curate our feeds are the modern equivalent of hypnopedia. They don't whisper lessons while we sleep, but they shape what information reaches us while we're awake. They reinforce our existing beliefs, shield us from challenging perspectives, create filter bubbles where everyone agrees with us. Over time, this narrows our thinking, makes alternative viewpoints seem not just wrong, but incomprehensible. We're being conditioned, but the conditioning is invisible. We think we're making free choices about what to read, what to watch, what to believe. But those choices are being shaped by systems designed to influence us in specific directions. The menu is curated, the options are limited, the outcomes are predicted. Genetic engineering is advancing toward the kind of embryo manipulation Huxley imagined. We're not creating castes yet, but we're moving toward the ability to select and modify traits before birth. The ethical debates focus on preventing disease, but the technology doesn't stop there. Once you can eliminate genetic vulnerabilities, you can enhance desirable characteristics. Once you can enhance, you can design. The slippery slope that leads to Bokanovsky's process starts with preventing childhood cancer. Who could oppose that? But each step forward makes the next step easier to justify. If we can prevent disease, why not enhance intelligence? If we can enhance intelligence, why not optimize for specific capabilities? If we can optimize individuals, why not coordinate those optimizations to create a more efficient society? Pharmacological mood management is already widespread. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, stimulants, we're already using chemistry to regulate consciousness. The drugs aren't perfect yet. They have side effects. They don't work for everyone. They're crude compared to soma. But the principle is established. We've accepted that emotional states are problems to be solved through biochemistry. Virtual reality and immersive entertainment are primitive versions of the feelies. We're learning to create experiences that bypass reality, that offer sensation without consequence. As the technology improves, the distinction between lived experience and simulated experience will blur. Why have difficult real relationships when you can have perfect simulated ones? Why travel to uncomfortable real places when virtual tourism offers better weather and no crowds? Each technology alone seems benign or even beneficial, but together they're creating the infrastructure for a brave new world. Not through conspiracy or deliberate tyranny, but through the accumulated logic of making things easier, more pleasant, more efficient. We're building the system that will condition our children without meaning to, simply by pursuing comfort and convenience. The resistance problem? If the world state is so effective at controlling consciousness, what does resistance even look like? This is the question Huxley leaves us with, and it's brutally difficult. Traditional resistance assumes you're fighting against something you recognize as oppression. But what if the oppression has been internalized so completely that you can't perceive it? What if your desires themselves have been manufactured? How do you resist when you don't want to resist? Bernard Marx and Helmholtz Watson represent two types of imperfect conditioning. Bernard is physically small for an alpha, a mistake in the embryo process. And this physical difference creates psychological difference. He's uncomfortable in society not because he thinks differently, but because he's treated differently. His resistance is reactive, personal, not principled. Helmholtz is more interesting. His conditioning worked perfectly. He's everything an alpha should be. But his very excellence creates dissatisfaction. He's so good at propaganda writing that he senses there's something more possible. A deeper kind of writing that his society has no use for. His resistance grows from within, from the gap between his potential and what his society allows him to express. Both are exiled to islands where other misfits live, communities of people who couldn't be properly conditioned. This is the world state's solution to dissent. Isolation rather than punishment. Let the troublemakers live together somewhere far away where they can't infect others. But John represents a different possibility. Someone raised outside the system who encounters it as an adult. He has the language and concepts to critique it because he was formed by a different tradition, by Shakespeare's language of passion and meaning and moral complexity. His resistance is cognitive, rooted in an alternative vision of what human life could be. This is why the world state is so careful to eliminate history, philosophy, and serious literature. These provide the vocabulary for dissent. They offer alternative values against which the present system can be measured. Without that vocabulary, criticism becomes literally unthinkable. So the first step of resistance is recovering the language that's been lost. Reading books that don't reinforce the dominant narrative. Studying history to understand that the present arrangement isn't inevitable. Learning philosophy to articulate what's wrong with a system that seems to work perfectly. The second step is embracing discomfort. The world state rules through pleasure, which means resistance requires accepting pain. Not seeking pain for its own sake, but refusing to medicate away every negative feeling, refusing to fill every moment with distraction, refusing to optimize life for maximum comfort. This is extraordinarily difficult because it requires going against every instinct that modern society cultivates. We're trained from birth to avoid discomfort, to seek pleasure, to maximize satisfaction. Choosing otherwise feels insane, masochistic, perverse, but it's the only path to recovering authentic experience. The third step is building alternatives. The world state can't allow communities organized around different principles because they demonstrate that other ways of living are possible. This is why islands are necessary, why dissidents must be isolated. Their mere existence is threatening. creating space for different values, different relationships, different ways of finding meaning. This is revolutionary in a society dedicated to universal samity. It doesn't require violence or even explicit opposition. It just requires refusing to participate, building something else in the cracks and margins. But Huxley is honest about the cost. John's attempt to live differently ends in suicide. He can't withstand the pressure of a society that treats his values as entertainment, that turns his suffering into spectacle, that wants to consume even his resistance as a novel experience. The question of progress. At the heart of Brave New World is a question about progress itself. The world state represents the culmination of scientific rationalism applied to social organization. It's what happens when you take the Enlightenment project seriously, when you genuinely try to engineer human happiness through reason and technology. And it works. By every measurable standard, the world state is successful. Life expectancy is high, disease is eliminated, poverty doesn't exist, violence is rare, people report being happy. The system is stable, efficient, sustainable. This is the rational paradise that philosophers have dreamed about for centuries. So why does it feel like a nightmare? What exactly is wrong with it? The answer forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. We say we want happiness, but we actually want something more complex and contradictory. We want meaning, which requires struggle. We want love, which requires vulnerability. We want freedom, which requires risk. We want excellence, which requires inequality. We want authenticity, which requires the possibility of failure. The world state offers happiness, genuine happiness by any objective measure. But it's a happiness divorced from meaning, from depth, from the tragic dimension of existence that gives life its weight and significance. This is Huxley's deepest insight, that there's a fundamental incompatibility between optimization and meaning. When you engineer systems for maximum efficiency and satisfaction, you eliminate the slack, the friction, the difficulty that creates space for authentic choice and genuine achievement. Progress, understood as increasing control over nature and human nature, leads inevitably toward the world state. Not because anyone intends to create dystopia, but because each step toward greater control seems justified by the problems it solves. Each convenience seems worth the small loss of autonomy. Each comfort seems worth the slight erosion of meaning, and then one day you wake up and discover you've built a prison out of pleasures. You're free in theory, but conditioned in practice. You're happy by every measure except the ones that can't be measured. The question Huxley leaves us with is whether progress might require us to stop progressing, at least in certain directions. Whether wisdom might mean accepting limits on our power to reshape human nature. Whether the good life might require preserving difficulty, preserving the conditions that allow meaning to emerge, even if those conditions also allow suffering. This is not a call to abandon medicine or reject technology, but it might be a call to recognize that not every problem should be solved. Not every discomfort should be eliminated. Not every rough edge should be smoothed away. That some of what we experience as problems are actually features, necessary elements of a fully human existence. The choice before us. We're standing at a crossroads. The technologies that could create the world state are emerging around us. The logic that would justify their deployment is already in place. We're being offered a deal. Trade freedom for security, depth for comfort, meaning for pleasure. And the offer is seductive because the benefits are real and immediate, while the costs are abstract and deferred. Soma would eliminate so much suffering. Genetic engineering could prevent so much disease. Social conditioning could reduce so much conflict. Entertainment could fill so much emptiness. Why not take the deal? What's the argument against paradise? The argument is that what's being offered isn't actually paradise. It's a simulation of paradise that eliminates the conditions necessary for anything to matter. It's contentment without fulfillment, satisfaction without meaning, life without depth. The citizens of the world state aren't evil. They're not even unhappy. They're just hollow. They move through existence experiencing pleasure, but never purpose. Satisfied, but never complete. They're alive in the biological sense, but not in the meaningful sense. They're well adjusted to a system that itself is sick. Huxley forces us to ask, what are we willing to sacrifice for comfort? What are we willing to trade for the elimination of suffering? At what point does the cure become worse than the disease? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're urgent practical questions that our society must answer in the next few decades. The technologies that could create the world state won't wait for us to figure out the ethics. They're advancing according to their own logic, driven by market forces and human desire for improvement. Every parent who edits their child's genome to prevent disease is making a choice. Every person who takes drugs to smooth their emotional life is making a choice. Every individual who trades privacy for convenience is making a choice. None of these choices alone creates dystopia. But together, accumulated across millions of people and decades of time, they're creating the world we'll inhabit. The question is whether we'll make those choices consciously, with full awareness of what we're trading away, or whether we'll drift into the brave new world without meaning to, one convenience at a time, until we wake up and discover we've built a cage we can't escape because we've forgotten what freedom feels like. Aldous Huxley died on November 22, 1963, the same day John F. Kennedy was assassinated. His death was overshadowed by that event, barely mentioned in newspapers. But his final message was clear. On his deathbed, unable to speak, Huxley wrote a note to his wife requesting LSD. He'd spent the last decade of his life experimenting with psychedelics, believing they offered access to levels of consciousness that rational thought couldn't reach. His wife gave him the injection, and he died hours later, having made one final journey into the depths of mind. This is perfectly consistent with his life's work. Huxley never rejected consciousness expansion. He rejected the shallow manipulation of consciousness for social control. He rejected the reduction of the human spirit to a collection of conditioned reflexes. He rejected the elimination of depth in favor of surface pleasure. But he believed passionately in the exploration of consciousness, in pushing beyond ordinary perception to encounter realities that everyday awareness can't access. The difference between soma and psychedelics, in his view, was that soma pacifies while psychedelics challenge. Soma makes you comfortable with things as they are. Psychedelics reveal that things as they are is just one possibility among many. The message of Brave New World isn't that we should reject science or technology or progress. It's that we should use these tools to expand human possibility rather than constrain it, to deepen consciousness rather than flatten it, to create space for meaning rather than eliminate it. Huxley's warning has become more urgent with each passing year. We're building the infrastructure for the world state faster than we're developing the wisdom to resist it. We're creating systems that can manipulate consciousness with increasing precision, and we're doing it in the name of progress, efficiency, happiness. The question is whether we'll choose the sterile paradise of the world state or something messier, riskier, and more fully human. Whether we'll trade freedom for comfort or accept that freedom requires discomfort. Whether we'll embrace the full catastrophe of human existence or settle for a chemically managed simulation of life. Brave New World shows us both possibilities with unflinching clarity. It shows us the appeal of control and the horror of what's lost when control becomes total. It shows us what we gain by eliminating suffering, and what we lose by eliminating the conditions that make meaning possible. The choice is ours. But we're running out of time to make it consciously. The Brave New World isn't coming in 600 years. It's emerging around us right now, taking shape through technologies and systems and choices that seem innocent individually, but that together are creating something unprecedented and potentially irreversible. Huxley's final gift is the clarity to see what we're building before it's too late to choose differently. The vision of a world where everyone is happy and no one is human. The warning that paradise might be the most dangerous thing we could create. The reminder that some things matter more than happiness, that meaning requires difficulty, that being fully human means accepting suffering alongside joy. The question isn't whether we can build the brave new world. We can. The technology is almost here. The question is whether we should, whether the elimination of suffering is worth the cost of everything that makes suffering meaningful, whether we want to be comfortable or complete, whether we choose pleasure or purpose, That choice will define what it means to be human in the centuries ahead. And we're making it right now, one technology at a time, one convenience at a time, one trade of freedom for comfort at a time. Huxley showed us where that path leads. Now we have to decide whether to keep walking it or find another way. The decision is ours, but only for a little while longer.